Elon Musk's private jet touched down for the last time. He savored a final sip of rare wine, gazing at his opulent penthouse. For the next 30 days, the tech mogul would trade his billion-dollar lifestyle for just $1 a day. No luxuries, no safety net, just survival. As Elon stepped into this new reality, he felt both nervous and intrigued. What awaited him in the world of everyday struggles? Unknown to him, an encounter on day 3 would challenge everything he believed about wealth and humanity. This month promised to change everything. But how? Are you ready for the shocking revelation that awaits? Elon's phone buzzed, interrupting his morning coffee ritual in his sprawling mansion. He glanced at the screen, a smirk playing on his lips as he read the message from his friend. You wouldn't last a day living like the rest of us. Surrounded by the trappings of his success, abstract art on the walls, a view of the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, Elon felt a familiar spark of competitiveness ignite within him. "Try me," he typed back, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. The response came almost immediately, laying out the terms of an audacious challenge. 30 days, living on just $1 per day. No safety net, no exceptions. Elon's thumb hovered over the send button, doubt creeping into his mind. Could he really do this? He'd faced countless challenges in business, but this was different, personal, raw. With a deep breath, he hit send, sealing his fate for the next month. As his driver dropped him off on a busy street corner in an unfamiliar part of the city, Elon felt oddly exposed. The cacophony of car horns and chatter assaulted his ears. People jostled past him, some giving curious glances, others too absorbed in their own worlds to notice. Elon clutched his single-dollar bill, its flimsiness between his fingers a stark reminder of the task ahead. A growl from his stomach jolted him back to reality. Food. He needed food. His eyes scanned the unfamiliar landscape, finally landing on a small convenience store across the street. He pushed open the door, a bell chiming overhead. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, barely looked up from her magazine. As Elon reached for a small loaf of bread, the door chimed again. An elderly woman shuffled in, her wrinkled hands trembling as she counted out a handful of coins. Elon froze, his fingers still on the bread. He looked at the woman, then at his dollar, then back at the woman. "Excuse me," the elderly woman's soft voice broke the silence. "Could you help me read this price? My eyes aren't what they used to be." Elon hesitated, then walked over to her. As he leaned in to read the label, he saw the deep lines etched into her face, each one a story of struggle and perseverance. Something shifted inside him, a feeling he couldn't quite name. In that moment, Elon realized this wasn't just about him anymore. This challenge had suddenly become so much bigger than he'd ever anticipated. As night descended, the bustling streets took on a more sinister tone. Elon's stomach churned, partly from hunger, partly from the realization that he had nowhere to sleep. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a physical force, each step reminding him of how far he'd fallen from his plush king-size bed. He wandered the unfamiliar streets, eyes darting from one potential resting spot to another. A park bench caught his attention, but the sight of a police officer nearby made him think twice. An alleyway seemed promising until a stray cat hissed at him, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Elon's heart raced. How had finding a place to sleep become such a monumental task? Rain began to fall, a light drizzle at first that quickly turned into a steady downpour. Elon's clothes, not designed for this kind of weather, clung to his skin. He huddled under the awning of a closed shop, watching as people hurried by with umbrellas and raincoats. No one spared him a glance. He was invisible now, just another shadow in the night. The chill set in, seeping into his bones. Elon rubbed his arms, trying to generate some warmth. His thoughts drifted to his mansion, to the thermostat he could adjust with a simple voice command. Now he'd give anything for a blanket, even a thin one. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing and shoving each other playfully. Elon shrunk back, suddenly aware of how recognizable his face was. What if someone saw him like this? The thought sent a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Desperation began to set in as the night wore on. Elon's eyes landed on a homeless shelter across the street. Hope surged through him as he approached, only to be crushed when he saw the full sign hanging in the window. The reality of homelessness hit him like a physical blow. How many people face this every night? As he turned away from the shelter, something caught his eye. A large cardboard box lay next to a dumpster, relatively dry thanks to the building's overhang. Elon felt a pang of, was it gratitude? He never thought he'd be thankful for a cardboard box, yet here he was. With careful movements, he arranged the box into a makeshift shelter. It wasn't much, but it would keep the rain off. As he crawled inside, the cardboard creaked under his weight. The smell of damp paper and traces of whatever the box had once held filled his nostrils. Lying there, every sound made him jump. A car backfiring in the distance, footsteps approaching, then fading away. The rustle of something or someone moving nearby. Sleep seemed impossible. Elon's mind raced, calculating the days left in this challenge. 29 more nights like this. The thought was almost unbearable. He closed his eyes, trying to will himself to sleep. The hard ground beneath him was a constant reminder of his new reality. In that moment, as he lay curled up in a cardboard box on a city street, Elon Musk felt truly humbled for the first time in years. The first rays of dawn crept through the gaps in Elon's cardboard shelter, painting streaks of pale light across his face. His eyes fluttered open, heavy with exhaustion. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then reality crashed back, as unyielding as the hard ground beneath him. Elon emerged from his makeshift home, his joints protesting with every movement. The street was already stirring, a far cry from the peaceful mornings he was used to in his mansion. A pair of worn shoes came into view, followed by a gentle voice. "You new out here?" He looked up, startled. An older man stood before him, his weathered face etched with kindness. Elon nodded, unsure how to respond. The man extended a hand, helping Elon to his feet. "Name's Frank. Come on, let's get you some coffee." Elon hesitated, his hand instinctively reaching for a wallet that wasn't there. Frank seemed to read his mind. "Don't worry, it's on me. Consider it a welcome to the neighborhood." They walked to a small coffee cart on the corner. Frank ordered 2 cups, handing one to Elon with a smile. "Drink up. It'll put some warmth back in your bones." As they sipped their coffee, Frank's eyes crinkled with curiosity. "So, what's your story? Most folks don't end up here by choice." Elon settled for a partial truth. I made a bet to live on $1 a day for a month." Frank raised an eyebrow. "A bet, huh? Well, that's a new one." He took another sip of coffee, his gaze distant. "You know, I used to be a financial analyst, had it all, the corner office, the fancy car, the works. Then the market crashed and I lost everything. Ended up right here on these streets." Elon's eyes widened. He'd seen the statistics, but hearing a personal story made it real in a way spreadsheets never could. How did you survive?" Frank's smile was tinged with sadness. "One day at a time, and with help from folks like Marie over there." He nodded towards the coffee cart owner, who waved back. "She gives me a free cup every morning. It's not much, but it reminds me I'm still human, you know?" Elon felt a lump forming in his throat. He thought of the countless homeless people he'd walked past, never stopping to consider their stories. The weight of his ignorance pressed down on him, heavier than any burden he'd ever carried. As Frank walked away, Elon's mind raced. He thought of his vast wealth, his ambitious projects. How many lives could he change if he really put his mind to it? Not just with grand gestures, but with small acts of kindness, like Marie's daily coffee. He glanced at his watch, a habit from his old life. Only 29 days left in this challenge. But suddenly, it didn't feel like a challenge anymore. It felt like an opportunity to learn, to grow, to see the world through new eyes. Elon's muscles screamed in protest as he trudged down the street, his hands raw and blistered from hours of carrying bricks. His shoulders ached, and his lower back throbbed with each step. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the unfamiliar landscape. His stomach growled loudly, a constant reminder of the challenge he'd undertaken. $5. He'd earned $5 precious for his back-breaking work at the construction site. Now, clutching his hard-earned money, Elon scanned the storefronts lining the street. His eyes landed on a small convenience store, its fluorescent lights flickering weakly in the growing darkness. He pushed open the door, the bell chiming overhead. The cashier, a young woman with tired eyes, barely glanced up from her phone. Elon's gaze swept over the shelves, his mind racing to calculate the most efficient use of his funds. He finally settled on a small loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter tucked away in a corner. As he approached the counter, the cashier's eyes flicked over him, her expression a mixture of boredom and discomfort. She rang up his items without a word, her gaze never quite meeting his. $4.87, she mumbled, already reaching for her phone again. Elon handed over his money, acutely aware that he was now left with just 13 cents. As he gathered his purchases, he attempted a small smile. "Thank you," he said softly. The cashier's eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by the interaction. For a moment, something like recognition flickered across her face. But then she looked away, the moment lost. Finding a quiet spot in a nearby park, Elon settled onto a bench. He carefully opened the bread and peanut butter, rationing out a small portion. Each bite was a stark reminder of how far he'd fallen from his usual gourmet meals. Yet, as the peanut butter stuck to the roof of his mouth, he felt an odd sense of satisfaction. He'd earned this meal with his own two hands. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing and scrolling on their smartphones. Elon watched them, suddenly aware of how much of modern life revolved around digital access. He'd taken for granted the power of technology, the very thing that had built his empire. As he observed the teens, a spark of an idea began to form in his mind. What if he could use his skills, his knowledge of technology, to create something that could help people like Frank? Something that could bridge the gap between the world he came from and the one he now found himself in. The possibilities made his heart race, but as quickly as the excitement came, doubt crept in. Was he really equipped to solve a problem as complex as homelessness? Could technology alone address the intricate web of factors that led people to the streets? And even if he could come up with a solution, would he have the courage to see it through once this challenge was over? Elon wrapped up the remaining bread and peanut butter, carefully stowing them in his pocket. He had to make this meager meal last. As he stood up, his body protesting every movement, he realized that this experience was changing him in ways he never anticipated. It wasn't just about surviving on $1 a day anymore. It was about understanding a world he'd been blind to for so long. Elon's feet ached as he shuffled down the dimly lit street, his mind reeling from the day's experiences. The cool night air nipped at his skin, a reminder of his vulnerability in this unfamiliar world. He pulled his thin jacket tighter, wishing for something warmer. As he rounded a corner, a passerby's face flickered with recognition. "Is that?" the man mumbled, fumbling for his phone. Elon's heart sank. He quickened his pace, hoping to disappear into the shadows. But it was too late. Within minutes, a small crowd gathered, phones out, camera flashes illuminating the sidewalk. "Elon Musk, what are you doing here?" someone called out. He felt exposed, vulnerable. The crowd pressed closer, their curiosity palpable. Elon's chest tightened, his breath coming in short gasps. He scanned for an escape route. A woman pushed forward, concerned. "Are you okay, Mr. Musk? Do you need help?" She offered a crumpled $20 bill. Elon considered taking it, ending this experiment, but he shook his head. "No, thank you. I'm fine." "It's just a publicity stunt," a man shouted. "He's probably filming some reality show." The accusation stung. Elon tried to explain, but the words caught in his throat. How could he convey the profound impact of the past few days? A news crew appeared, thrusting a microphone in his face. "Mr. Musk, what's going on? Why are you here on the streets?" "I made a bet," he began shakily, "to live on $1 a day, but it's become so much more than that. I've seen things, met people." The crowd pressed closer, recording his every move. Panic rose in his chest. He needed to escape, to process everything he'd learned. Elon ducked into a narrow alley, his heart pounding. He leaned against the cool brick wall, catching his breath. As the crowd's noise faded, he realized the challenge had taken an unexpected turn. He wasn't just navigating poverty now, he was grappling with his own identity and others' perceptions of him. He slid down the wall, sitting on the cold pavement. His meager dinner pressed against his leg, a reminder of how far he'd come from his usual luxury. As he stared at the sliver of sky between buildings, a thought struck him. Maybe this recognition was exactly what he needed to bridge his two worlds. Elon's back pressed against the cold brick wall, his eyes fixed on the sliver of sky above. The alley's shadows wrapped around him like a cloak, offering a brief respite from the chaos of recognition. His burner phone, a lifeline to his old world, sat heavy in his pocket. He pulled it out, his thumb hovering over the emergency contact. One call, and this experiment would be over. 2 weeks had passed since he'd stepped into this unfamiliar life. The physical toll was evident. His clothes hung loose on his frame, dark circles shadowed his eyes. His stomach gnawed with constant hunger and exhaustion seeped into his bones. But it was the emotional weight that threatened to break him. The isolation, the fear of being recognized, the crushing realization of how quickly one could fall through society's cracks. A notification lit up his screen. Curiosity overrode his hesitation, and he opened the message from Sarah, a shelter worker who'd recognized him. She invited him to help at the shelter. No cameras, no press. Just him and those who needed help the most. Elon made his way to the shelter. The interior was a stark contrast to his usual surroundings. Worn furniture, the smell of industrial cleaner and reheated food. But it was the people that caught his attention, volunteers bustling about with determination and compassion. For hours, Elon immersed himself in the shelter's operations. He served food, sorted donations, and listened to stories that both broke his heart and filled him with admiration for human resilience. As he helped an elderly man sort through donated clothes, the man's hands trembled. "I used to be an engineer," he said softly. "One medical emergency, and it all fell apart." Elon's throat tightened. He saw himself in the man's eyes, the intelligence, the potential, the cruel twist of fate that had brought him here. In that moment, Elon's commitment solidified. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about creating real, lasting change. His mind raced with possibilities. Solar panels for sustainable energy, an app connecting donors with specific needs, a skills training program leveraging online resources. As the day wound down, Sarah pulled him aside. "We could use someone with your skills here. Not just money, but your ability to innovate, to see solutions where others see problems." Elon nodded, a new fire burning within him. This challenge had given him something invaluable, a ground-level perspective on issues he'd only seen from afar. His wealth and influence, combined with this new understanding, could bridge worlds and create meaningful impact. Elon's fingers hovered over his phone's screen, his mind racing with possibilities. Solar panels for sustainable energy, a skills training app connecting the homeless with online resources, an algorithm to match donors with specific needs, all within reach. The realization hit him. His experiment was temporary, but for the people he'd met, this was life. He glanced around the soup kitchen, taking in the worn faces and tired eyes of those around him. A man to his left spoke softly, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "I had a dream once, you know. Wanted to start my own business, but life had other plans. Medical bills, layoffs, it all adds up." Elon felt a lump forming in his throat. He thought of his own companies, his innovations. How could he use them to make real change, not just throwing money at the problem, but creating sustainable solutions? His phone buzzed. A local news article flashed across the screen. "Tech mogul spotted serving at homeless shelter." Elon's heart raced. How would this unexpected exposure affect his mission? He scrolled through the comments, each one a stark reminder of the divide between his world and the one he'd stepped into. An anonymous user's comment caught his eye. "Money's not enough. We need real change." Elon's jaw clenched. They were right. Wealth alone couldn't solve this complex issue. But what if he could leverage both his resources and this newfound perspective to create lasting impact? He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, heads turned, curious eyes following his movement. For a moment, Elon felt exposed, vulnerable, but as he met their gazes, he saw something beyond curiosity, hope. "I have an idea," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in his stomach. "But I'm going to need your help." The room fell silent, all eyes on him. Elon took a deep breath and began to speak, outlining his vision for a future where technology, innovation, and compassion worked hand in hand to address homelessness. As he spoke, he saw faces light up with interest, nods of agreement, and even a few tears. He realized that his wealth wasn't just about luxury, it was a tool for transformation. And combined with the insights he'd gained during this challenge, it could be more powerful than he'd ever imagined. When he finished, the silence was deafening. Then slowly, applause began to build. It wasn't the polite clapping of a tech conference or the roar of a product launch. It was the sound of hope, of possibility, of a community ready for change. Elon left the soup kitchen that day with a new mission, one that would change the course of his life and countless others. As he stepped out into the bustling street, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. As the sun rose on the final day of Elon's challenge, he stood at the shelter's entrance, a newfound determination in his eyes. The past T-month had reshaped him profoundly. Gone was the tech mogul solely focused on conquering space. In his place stood a man who had glimpsed the struggles of everyday people and vowed to make a difference. Elon's companies were already pivoting, their resources now directed towards creating affordable housing solutions and job training programs. His experience had shown him that true innovation wasn't just about cutting-edge technology. It was about using that technology to uplift those who needed it most. As he walked back into his old life, Elon knew he'd never see the world the same way again. The bet was over, but a new challenge had just begun, one that would redefine his legacy and touch countless lives. He was determined to inspire others to address social issues, starting with himself.